Hi, I'm Whitney Belker with Miami's Global Connection. Our show is designed to raise public awareness of the interdependent world in which we live. We focus on local leaders who are involved in diverse international issues and projects. The sponsor of our show is the Greater Miami chapter of the United Nations Association. And what would you say to those who criticize the U.S.'s support of the UN in saying that, listen, we've got so many problems here at home. Why are we focusing on what's happening in Bosnia or in Afghanistan when we can't even take care of our own homeless and our own hungry?
Well, we can do both.
In your capacity as an international specialist, if you had the opportunity to address the U.S. Congress, what would you want to say?
Well, I would just encourage the U.S. Congress to continue or to be more supportive of the United Nations, because we're living in truly an interdependent world, a multipolar world where you cannot make unilateral decisions. You have to work with these other countries. That's the only way we can defeat terrorism, overcome drug abuse, move ships, planes, aircraft, mail safely around the world, and we are still the only superpower, and we have to cooperate with other countries.
Well, what is the definition of genocide, then?
That basically is extermination of whole ethnic groups in large numbers, as it happened just because of belonging to an ethnic group.
Right, and legally, who has the right to make the decision what is considered genocide and what is considered just a war of ethnic factions?
That is always considering the facts, and the organ that would make the decision for intervention is the Security Council.
Well, the European Union is a relatively young animal in the global political zoo. It has been created after the Second World War in Europe, and it is the way how the Europeans have learned the lessons of wars. And it is, in a way, the biggest and the most important peace project.
In terms of your direct communication, for example, with the State Department and the White House, what are you really pushing for?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have continuous discussions with the State Department. We have a common agenda.
You mentioned the International Criminal Tribunal. Now, is this the court system that the U.S. is refusing to sign the treaty on?
Correct. That's
so what is the rest of the world saying about the fact that the United States refuses to sign this treaty? And there's been a tremendous amount of scrutiny, as we're aware of, on the FTA in general. And what perhaps people in Miami are most familiar with are the protesters from, say, the labor groups, the environmental groups, the manufacturing, who are concerned that jobs might move overseas. If you had the opportunity to address these different groups on these issues, what would your message be?
Well, the first thing I would tell them is that globalization is not a cause of FTAA. FTAA is an effort to give order and to give a judicial and orderly framework to what is happening in our lives, which is globalization. Capital is moving across borders. There's nothing neither you or I or anybody can do, including 34 ministers. It is the world in which we live in. People need to wake up to the reality that globalization is not a cliche. I challenge my friends to start analyzing on their daily life, from the moment they wake up until they go to bed, the products they use, from the first
from the toothpaste to the hairbrush to the shampoo.
And you will see the number of countries direction. This train has, in fact, left the station, this globalization, and it's not anyone who can stand in front of it. It will run over you. So if you're wise, you would try to figure out a way to get on it and steer it. And that's what we're trying to do in FTAA, as usual.
Several things have happened. We've had the events of September the 11th. We've had shocks to democratic systems, shocks to the economies of nations, and concerns in the hemisphere about whether democracy can make it, whether democracy is good enough. And this summit...
United States, we enjoy the privilege of many of these rights. This is, the foundation of the United States was built on the civil liberties and the human rights, where we can all, practice our own religion. We have freedom of speech. Why should our viewers at home be concerned about such things as human rights? Right now, there are 500 missiles pointed, Chinese missiles pointed at Taiwan, which are currently threatening the Taiwanese people.
Short-term missile against Taiwan, maybe more, because it's increasing.
Winston Churchill said that democracy is the worst system of government devised by man, until you think of the alternative. And those of us who've lived on the alternative, I think we'll almost always choose democracy. So the seemly chaos, conflict is healthy. It's not something to feel bad about. It's great. It's a cause for celebration.
You're correct. And I think it's interesting to note that I believe like 20 years ago, there were only three countries that had locally elected government officials in the region, and now I believe there are only 3 countries that don't have diverse locally elected officials.
But we have different views, partly because we see different news. And it is a fact that when you are living in the United States, you are so absorbed by all kind of domestic stories, of a very limited number, by the way, which are shown on all the channels you can see. While
and now it's all syndicated, so the diversity of news sources is
well, I don't want to be dragged into your internal problems there, but everybody who travels in Europe and watches television, not only do we have programs in different languages there, each country has 2, 3, 4 television stations.
Hi, I'm Whitney Belker, and welcome back to Miami's Global Connection. Today we're continuing our conversation on the new challenges regarding the Bioterrorism Act. Have we gone too far to understanding that, these were put in place to protect our citizens and from any threat of any chemicals or bioterrorist types of acts?
You need to build a system off of what the trade's currently doing, what businesses do today, because the businesses want to protect their product and their name from being corrupted by a terrorist attack, by drugs, by theft. They're already doing it. And if FDA can build a system and a dialogue with the business community, they can take the best possible shot at stopping a bioterrorism threat.
So it's probably a very similar
It's a very similar process. Now we don't have the war on drugs because we lost that war. Now we have the war on terrorism. So, as Lee was explaining, this is a very blunt sword to attack a serious problem. But I think it'll be ultimately ineffective in stopping any kind of bioterrorist threat from entering our food supply.
So what's currently being done in your capacity as one of the highest-ranking ambassadors from Europe in building relationships with the United States? What are you currently doing to try to rebuild these relationships?
Well, we are just starting a new year. We will have a European Union United States Summit meeting.
If someone has a cause, that there is a way to make your voice heard by going through these different processes.
Absolutely. Once whoever feels that his or her rights are violated will ask for redress. And if it doesn't work in the domestic courts, then there are these. That's why these international guarantees are these minimum standards of guarantees.
There's been a tremendous amount of criticism of President Bush's administration, and what some people would say has been a lack of attention toward the Latin America and Americas region. What do you think about that?
A vision created by the 34 democratically elected leaders in 1994 to create the largest common market ever in the history of mankind. It would be to unite this hemisphere of about 800 million people into a market that would provide for economic growth.
And what do you think is important for our audience to know about Rwanda and what some people are classifying as a failure of the United Nations and the international community in terms of their lack of intervention?
That was absolutely a lack of political will. In 100 days, 800,000 people were totally exterminated. 800,000 in just 100 days, which was, if you compare to the Second World War, 5 times faster than the Nazis did during the Holocaust period.
Do you believe that it's time to maybe look at a different structure for the UN, or maybe adapt a different alternative? There have been a few radical ideas that have been thrown out in recent days.
Yeah, I think it's time to look at the UN, obviously, and the UN should be undergoing an internal evaluation constantly.